She sat there still, trying to keep her face from reacting. But the tension in her jaw, the flicker in her eyes, and the way her hands stiffened gave it away. The question wasn't complicated, it wasn't even directed at her specifically. Someone had asked about the next family reunion, whether everyone would be together like old times, whether all the kids would be there, whether Robyn would be invited. In that moment, something shifted. What followed didn't come from one of the original wives. It didn't come from Christine, who many expected to be the first to speak on this. It didn't come from Janelle, who has always played it balanced, or from Meri, whose silence lately speaks louder than her words. It came from Mykelti, one of the adult children, someone who had once stood beside Robyn, who had defended her, humanized her, even understood her when others didn't. But this time, sitting beside her husband Tony during one of their private discussions on Patreon, Mykelti didn't flinch. She didn't skirt around it. She didn't play it diplomatic. She looked into the camera, into the eyes of every listener who's watched this family crumble over a decade, and said what many had already suspected. Robyn would not be welcome at future family gatherings. Not by her, not by Tony, not by many of the other siblings. The rift wasn't rumors anymore. It was real, spoken, confirmed, and the truth wasn't thrown like a weapon. It was delivered with calm, thoughtful language, but that made it sting worse. Mykelti didn't groove for gossip, and she didn't criticize out of revenge. Instead, she explained. Carefully, painfully, she said the family's wounds were now too deep to ignore. And while Robyn often portrayed herself as the peacemaker, always wanting unity, the reality felt different behind closed doors. There had been coldness, manipulation, and painful detachment. There had been favoritism, distance, patterns that kept repeating, and over time, trust started bleeding out. It wasn't a single event, it was everything. Over the years, during the holidays, during COVID, during Christine's heartbreak, during moments when Kody's children felt abandoned, and Robyn sat quietly just out of frame, rarely stepping in, rarely stepping up, always seemingly protected, untouched, separate. And then Tony spoke. Usually the quieter one, usually lightening the mood. This time his voice was heavy, firm. He said something that stopped everyone. He described how Robyn sees the rest of the family, not like extended family, not like equals, but as burdens, as less than. He used a word that caught like a spark on dry grass, parasites. That single word turned the conversation into something else. This wasn't just awkward estrangement anymore, this was rejection. Full and final, not casual dislike, contempt, and Mykelti, she didn't disagree. In fact, she backed it up. Not with heat, but with weary certainty. In her expression, you could see what their generation is carrying, the weight of missing bonds, broken promises, and years of watching their father's presence shift away from all but one household. Years ago, there were birthday parties where the entire family laughed across folding tables, kids screaming across grassy backyards, paper plates stacked with cake, and all the wives lined up, trying to act like everything was okay. But those memories are gone now. Reunions are different. The energy isn't there. The calls aren't made. Most of the adult children don't even bother reaching out to the one wife they once called mom without question. For many of them, Robyn is no longer mom, not even family, she's something different now. On the outside, even if she's next to their father. And what makes it all worse is she sees it, she knows it. Her body language said it before anyone else did. In that quiet pause after the question, just before Mykelti answered, you could almost hear it in how Robyn's eyes looked away. The truth showed up in silence, long before it ever came out in words. So how did this happen? How did one woman go from being welcomed into a complicated family to being quietly pushed out of it? Why have the children, the ones who don't hold grudges as quickly, the ones who try to forgive, finally had enough? And what does this mean for the man who watched it fall apart but still refuses to admit who he chose along the way? Most importantly, why has Robyn Brown been cut off by nearly every adult child? And will she ever be let back in? The truth is, this didn't happen suddenly. This breakdown didn't come from one fight or one disagreement. It's been building, quietly, slowly, and painfully. Over multiple seasons, we've watched as tension shifted from uncomfortable to undeniable. The fractures that seemed fixable early on, they grew, they widened. And trust began to vanish piece by piece. When Robyn first joined the family, there was resistance, sure. That's normal in any plural marriage. A new wife enters a well-established structure, and adjustments take time. But this wasn't just the usual emotional shakeup. Something in the atmosphere changed after Robyn came in. It wasn't just newness, it was exclusivity. Over the years, she didn't blend in, she separated. Not obviously. Not all at once. But the closeness among the wives began to fade, and bonds that had taken decades to build started to crack. There were little signs. Kody began spending more nights at Robyn's. Other wives noticed, but they kept smiles on their faces, especially in front of the cameras. Meri went from first wife to forgotten. Janelle's independence became her armor. Christine started asking herself the question publicly, who's really in this with me? And then came COVID. And everything they'd all been pretending hadn't been happening for years became impossible to ignore. That period changed everything. It exposed what people were willing to tolerate and what they were done pretending about. While the rest of the world tried to figure out how to stay safe and connected, the Brown family began to implode in silence. Kody introduced strict protocols, so strict that most of his children, including Janelle's, felt completely shut out. Christine's house, once a warm gathering place for all the kids, turned cold from absence. Holidays didn't feel like holidays, birthdays felt hollow, time passed and so did relationships, but not with Robyn. With her, everything remained intact, because she followed the rules, or maybe because she helped create them. She became the quiet center of Kody's new version of loyalty. He wasn't leading in a shared direction anymore. He was orbiting one wife, one home, and the other wives, they weren't consulted. They were told. That's where the shift came. Leadership became control. Unity turned into division. Christine cried on the porch, packing up years of memories. Janelle stood on principle, choosing her sons over the illusion of partnership. Meri waited, hoping the tide would shift, but was left standing alone in the waves. And in the background, people started asking, why is Robyn untouched through all this? She wasn't loud. She didn't start public fights. But the decisions, the preferences, the alignment, they all pointed to her being something more than the fourth wife. She became the only wife who mattered. There's one moment viewers can't forget. A so-called emotional moment, Robyn sitting there, tears welling up, saying she wished everyone could be close again. That she wanted peace, family harmony, that it broke her heart to see things this way. But something in her expression didn't sit right, not for the audience, and not for some of the kids. The tears came, but the depth didn't. Not genuine heartbreak, just the look of someone mourning her own comfort, not the family's collapse. The crying felt off. That's when something shifted, not just for the wives, but for those watching at home. It became harder to believe that Robyn was the victim. It started to feel like she was shaping the narrative. Maybe not by yelling or scheming, but by gently nudging control. By letting decisions tilt one direction and never correcting the imbalance. Over time, people stopped seeing her as the peacemaker. They started seeing her as the quiet enabler. The person standing beside Kody, nodding softly, while the rest of the family got left in the cold. And now, with so many relationships permanently damaged, that image of Robyn, the one with tears but no follow-through, hangs over everything. So now we ask, did Robyn plan this? Or did she just benefit from it so completely that she forgot how to look concerned? Or maybe the real question is even harder to face. Did anyone ever matter after she walked in? When Christine said she was done, everything that had been held together by tension and denial shattered like thin glass, not with fireworks or screaming, but with something much colder. A decision. A quiet, final line drawn in the sand. And for viewers who had watched her cry, compromise, and hope for years, it wasn't shocking. It was heartbreaking. Because this wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the unraveling of a family that had always promised it would hold together no matter what. Christine had tried more than most. She had sacrificed her time, her voice, the balance of love she deserved, for the kids, for the family dream, for the man who stopped choosing her a long time ago. And when she finally walked away, she didn't do it for revenge. She did it for survival. That moment crushed something in everyone watching. But what lingered was Robyn's reaction. She didn't cry out. She didn't chase Christine down. Instead, she looked uncomfortable, like something she didn't plan for was finally front and center. And when she did speak, her words didn't land the way they should have. They weren't about Christine's pain, or the loss the entire family was about to feel. They circled back to her loss, her confusion, her sense of being left out, her worry about her own kids. Audience members watching from their homes felt it. The detachment. The way sympathy was there in language but not in spirit. And people started to question, did Robyn see this fallout coming? And worse, did she already prepare for it? Because if you go back and watch it again, closely, you'll notice something almost eerie. Robyn's conversations with Kody before Christine even left had already begun shifting. She was talking about rights and dynamics and what a marriage should be. She spoke about how things weren't working, but never took ownership that the system had changed heavily in her favor. Robyn had already started subtly building her foundation before anyone else walked away, like the crash was inevitable, and she didn't want to be caught off guard when the dust settled. And you know what? The kids saw it. Long before Christine made her move. They saw it in how their father's time vanished, in how Robyn's children became the only ones getting consistency, in how rules were firm for everyone else but flexible when it came to her house. Teenagers aren't blind, they know when they've been deprioritized, and they started stepping back not because they were disrespectful, but because they were tired. Tired of competing for attention, tired of pretending the system was fair, tired of smiling through birthdays with a dad who might not even show up. So when Christine chose to walk away, it wasn't just her decision. It was a ripple across all the hearts that had been bleeding silently. You could see it in Usable's face, in Trula's quiet confusion, in the way Gwendolyn's tone changed. This wasn't just about one wife leaving, it was an awakening. But what shook fans the most was how little changed in Robyn's world. She still had access, she still had emotional priority. Kody didn't seem devastated that Christine left. What he seemed was angry and confused, not at himself, but at how anyone could leave a family that had already left them long ago. Robyn, instead of reaching out with real grief, asked questions that centered more around structure than healing. Her concern was about what came next logistically, not what had been lost emotionally. And viewers asked themselves, was this love, or was this control? Because looking back now, Christine's exit didn't just break up the family, it revealed the truth everyone else had been too tired to say out loud. The family wasn't a unit anymore. It was a series of fractures held together by one man refusing to admit his presence was no longer equal, and by one woman whose calm involvement had made her seem innocent for far too long. The glass shattered, pieces fell to the floor, and Robyn, she stepped around them, not to clean them up but to protect the only piece that hadn't broken, her own. In the earlier seasons, things looked picture-perfect on the surface. Robyn entered the Brown family with soft-spoken promises, emotional vulnerability, and wide-eyed commitment to the ideal of sisterhood. She cried, she offered apologies, she talked about trust, teamwork, and building something sacred. And for a little while, people believed her, but something was always off. The smile seemed real, but the eyes, they told a different story. The energy around Robyn always felt like slow pressure. Like everyone was trying to make sure she felt included, while sacrificing a piece of themselves in the process. By the time Robyn officially joined the marriage, the other wives had already been living this lifestyle for years, cycling through the exhaustion of schedule swapping, emotional negotiations, and the constant balancing act of sharing one man. So when Robyn walked in with her own expectations, routines, and emotional needs, it wasn't just another wife added. It was an entirely new dynamic that reset the tone for everything. She came in needing more time, more understanding, more support, and it wore everyone else down, not because she was demanding out loud, but because no one wanted to be the one who pushed back. They wanted peace. They had fought so long for their family to survive that they couldn't afford another war, even a silent one. But beneath it all, the silent war began. There were moments when the tension would flare up, subtle but telling. Christine trying to smile through frustration. Janelle growing quieter with each passing episode. Meri, displaced emotionally and physically, watching the closeness grow between Kody and Robyn while she stood further and further away. And still, Robyn said all the right things. On camera, she praised the family. She cried for unity. She insisted she didn't want to be the favorite. But behind the curtain, actions told a louder story. Time allocation shifted. Kody's energy shifted. And the kids, they noticed. The children always notice first. By the time the pandemic hit, the mask of neutrality started slipping. Rules laid out by Kody felt rigid and absolute, but somehow they only made sense within one household. Robyn's. The protocols got stricter, the visits became rare, and grown children who had been holding space for their father their entire lives were now being told they were disrespectful for questioning any of it. Gabe and Garrison especially couldn't stay silent. They were direct, honest, furious. They missed their dad, they lived just minutes away and still couldn't see him. His reason, COVID safety. Their conclusion, excuses, painful ones. You could hear the heartbreak in Gabe's voice when he said he gave up asking. That he stopped calling. That he finally realized the relationship wasn't mutual. Kody responded not with compassion, but with rage, not outwardly violent, but emotionally cold. He accused his children of betrayal, of being ungrateful, of turning on him. But the truth was simple, they missed him, and they were done begging for the version of a father who only seemed to father people under Robyn's roof. That's when the older siblings began backing away from the image they once held. Robyn's place in the family structure, it no longer made sense to them. The more they spoke up about the imbalance, the more clear it became that their voices weren't being heard, not by their dad, and certainly not by Robyn. And still, in photos, in interviews, in carefully edited conversations, Robyn smiled. She looked down when things got hard. She teared up when her own children were mentioned, and the expression almost read as sincere. Until you watched 5 minutes longer. Until you realized the pain in other people's faces wasn't being met with the same kind of grief she showed for herself. Was it performance? Or was it someone clinging hard to the version of the story where she stayed blameless? Because the more things cracked, the further away Robyn drifted, not in isolation, but in control. And viewers began realizing this wasn't about one household winning affection. This was about a father growing more comfortable with anger than accountability. So when people look back on all those family smiles, they replay them differently now. Because once you learn that trust has faded, you can't unsee it in someone's eyes. The pandemic didn't break the Brown family, it exposed what had already been broken. But what happened during that time made the damage permanent. COVID didn't just force everyone into their corners. It showed them where they stood. It showed them who mattered, who didn't, and who was always quietly on the outside looking in. At the start of the lockdown, things were already tense. There were cracks, yes, but no one really expected how fast those would grow under pressure. Then came the rules. Kody stepped in. He laid down strict protocols for the family. He made them sound like they came from a place of love and caution. But if you listen closely, they came with conditions. Anyone who didn't follow these guidelines exactly, down to the letter, could not see him, not maybe later. Not with precautions in place, not at a distance, just no visits, no exceptions, and Robyn, she followed everything, or at least it appeared that way. Her household became the blueprint for compliance. And because of that, her household became the only door Kody walked through. One by one, the other wives tried to adjust. They asked questions. They offered compromises. Janelle had sons working essential jobs. She couldn't just lock them away as if the world outside didn't exist. Christine had kids with needs, emotions, lives that couldn't be put on hold for arbitrary boundaries. But Kody didn't want adjustments. He wanted control. The explanation was always the same: safety, protecting the family. But the logic always bent toward Robyn. Her kids were with him. Her needs were met. The others. They faced the silence, and the kids felt it hardest. Gabe, desperate to see his father, tried to explain how much he missed him. He wasn't being reckless. He wasn't ignoring the risks. He just wanted his dad. But instead of finding compassion, he found a wall. Kody scolded him, blamed him, eventually just stopped showing up. And Garrison, he went from being involved to being emotionally cut off. No explanation, no softness. No understanding that the choices being made were tearing a line through the family's foundation. Janelle watched it happen with an ache that never left her expression. Her sons, being pushed aside not for a good reason, but for a convenient one. Because they pushed back, because they didn't stay quiet. Christine didn't stay silent either. She never yelled. But her heart grew colder by the day. She looked around and saw what everyone was avoiding. That Kody wasn't choosing based on fairness. He was choosing comfort. He was choosing Robyn. And Robyn, she didn't say much, always quiet, always composed, always just emotional enough to look involved, but never enough to challenge what was happening. There was no recorded moment where she stood in public view and told Kody that maybe the other wives, the other children, deserved more. At least not where it counted. Not when someone else was crying. Not when a teenage boy said, "I think my dad doesn't love me anymore." Not when Janelle's eyes filled with tears and her voice cracked from the weight of dignity being stretched too far. Robyn didn't reach her hand across to comfort those moments. Not once. So while the house she lived in stayed full of routines and regular affection, the rest of the family watched someone they loved gradually disappear. The coldest part of abandonment isn't shouting, it's being ignored. And that's what lingered during every holiday skipped, every birthday missed, every call unreturned. Kody insisted it was all for safety, but it wasn't about the virus. It was about a family model that only worked if no one challenged what he said. So when people say Robyn benefited from the rules, it's not just about her being safe. It's about her being the only one allowed to matter. When Janelle finally said, "I choose my kids," it hit different. Because what she meant was, I won't let them beg for love while he gives it away somewhere else. And that choice, choosing the children over the illusion of marriage, wasn't rebellion. It was the only thing left to do when isolation turned into exile. It's easy to forget sometimes that the children were there for all of it, not just in the background, not just as side notes to their parents' stories. They were watching, listening, absorbing every quiet dismissal, every unfair word, every lopsided hug. And now, they've started speaking. And what they remember cuts deeper than anything that's ever been aired on TV. They don't scream. They don't twist words. But when Christine's kids talk, the truth is sharp, and it's not coming from bitterness, it's coming from lived experience. Mykelti was one of the first to surprise people. She had once defended Robyn, stood by her, given her grace when others didn't. For years, Mykelti had a unique position. She saw a different side of Robyn. But slowly, you could hear the change in her tone. The warmth faded. The trust cooled. And when she and Tony sat down on that Patreon livestream, there was no defense left to give. Tony didn't hold back. He laid out what had been simmering beneath the surface, using a word no one expected to hear. Parasites. He described how Robyn had treated the rest of the wives and their kids not as equals, not even with distant care, but as if they were draining something. Getting in the way, taking from what wasn't theirs. That word, so jarring, so specific, instantly reframed the story fans thought they knew, and Mykelti didn't correct him. She let it sit there, quietly, which for her said everything. P-Dunn, always more outspoken, took a different path. On his social media, especially TikTok, he's been vocal, blunt, and unapologetically raw. He's the kind of person who says what others are afraid to, sometimes even what they probably shouldn't. But in the noise, you can hear the hurt. He talks about being pushed aside, about feeling like Robyn's kids were given priority, and about the growing realization that his dad stopped showing up long before the cameras caught on. Gwendolyn, too, has spoken out, not in anger, in exhaustion. She's talked with her audience about the differences in how she was treated, how Robyn operated in the family, and how loyalty was no longer given, it had to be earned. There's a wisdom in her voice, a calm certainty that comes from finally seeing the truth without sugarcoating it. She no longer calls their family blended. She calls it what it's become, split. And then there's Gabriel and Garrison. Their pain hit viewers hard. These young men who were expected to understand when their dad turned them away, who were asked to be compliant in the name of safety, when what they really needed was love. Gabe's tearful confession, talking about how he tried to reach out, how he called and texted and waited, it broke something in the audience. His voice trembled not because he was angry, but because he was trying to make sense of being forgotten. And Garrison, he didn't want to be cut off, he wanted answers, he wanted fairness, but when he spoke up he was met with silence. That silence rang louder than any words ever could, and all the while Savannah stayed quiet. Her absence became its own kind of truth. No explosions, no public callouts, but when one child stops speaking about their father altogether, it tells you more than any headline ever could. These kids remember everything. Not the edits, not the interviews, the moments, the ones that happened after the cameras stopped rolling. They remember who showed up, who didn't, who made excuses, and who they're done forgiving. And when you look at that word again, when Tony said parasites, what it really captured was this: Robyn didn't see them as family, she tolerated them. As long as they stayed quiet, stayed away, and didn't threaten her place. But they're not quiet anymore. They're not children anymore. And they're finally holding someone accountable, even if she still won't admit it. Something shifted the moment Robyn went from being the newest wife to being the only one that seemed to hold any weight. The idea of plural marriage was supposed to mean shared responsibilities, equal love, balanced relationships. That was the dream, right? The big family, the co-mothers, the connected households. But slowly, that dream faded. It didn't shatter all at once. It unraveled in inches. At first, Robyn seemed like she wanted to help build the vision. She spoke about the values, honored the lifestyle, talked about unity and respect. But while she said all the right things, something else happened behind the scenes, a tilt of power. Not dramatic, not loud, but steady. Kody started spending more and more time at her house. The other wives knew the significance. They saw what was happening, even when he insisted nothing was changing. But things were changing. Fast. When he legally divorced Meri to marry Robyn, there were reasons given, mostly legal. The adoption of Robyn's children, the paperwork, the technicalities. But legal moves have emotional consequences. That shift gave Robyn something none of the other wives had ever been granted: position. She didn't ask to be seen as the favorite, that's what she claimed. But whether it was intentional or not, her place in Kody's life became unshakable. Emotional intimacy, decision-making authority, holiday planning, all roads led through Robyn. Not because the family voted on it, because Kody chose it, and the others felt it deep in their bones. Meri's face began to disappear from episodes, her voice quieter with every season. Her pain wasn't always said out loud, but it was there. A dull ache behind carefully chosen words. She had been there from the beginning, and now she was an afterthought in her own marriage. Janelle was different. She didn't cry, she didn't beg. But her entire spirit leveled into something harder. You could see the moments where she wanted to scream. Instead, she chose restraint, measured distance, but in her silence was fury. A kind of rage that builds up when you've been holding everything together for years, only to see it rewritten, with you cropped out. And Christine, she became the mirror the family avoided looking into. As her marriage dissolved, so did the lie that everything was okay. When she left, it wasn't with hate, it was with clarity. She was no longer a wife, she was no longer a partner, she was a placeholder in someone else's story. Even the kids began using different language. They talked less about my dad's house and more about Robyn's house. They said it like they didn't belong, like that space had become sacred, not because it was shared, but because it was closed off. There's one scene that stands out, a quiet one, easily missed. A moment on the couch, a pause in the conversation. Robyn says something about wanting unity, but Lisa's eyes, sitting next to her, unheard, show something more honest. The pain of watching someone speak as if they're the one losing everything when they already hold everything. Because Robyn wasn't just Kody's legal wife. She was his emotional safe zone, the only one he truly consulted, the only one whose kids still got all the grace, the only one who wasn't asked to sacrifice, and instead of holding the family together, that role tore it apart. Robyn wore the title of wife with exclusivity, not because she announced it, but because Kody made it so, and when that happened the others didn't realign. They revolted, quietly but completely. They stopped pretending that roles were equal, they stopped chasing fairness. They stopped asking for their turn, because once someone becomes the favorite in a system designed to be balanced, the rest aren't wives anymore. They're leftovers. It was quiet, no explosive energy, no tension in the room. Just Mykelti, sitting alongside Tony, speaking into a mic. Her baby was somewhere nearby, domestic noise echoing faintly in the background, but her voice, calm, strong, final, and what she said didn't come from bitterness. It came from a place of sad truth. All the years of watching, forgiving, hoping, staying silent, and now she wasn't silent anymore. She didn't yell, she didn't accuse with venom, and that's what made it hit even harder. She said Robyn wouldn't be welcome at family reunions. Not in the future, not in theory, not if things eventually calmed down. There wasn't a maybe. There wasn't a caveat. Robyn isn't invited. Robyn isn't part of that picture anymore. The room didn't shake, but the audience listening, they felt the ground shift beneath them. Because this wasn't coming from someone who always stood on the opposite side of Robyn, this was Mykelti, the one brown child who had publicly supported her for years, who had spoken well of her, who had tried to bridge the emotional gap between Christine and Robyn more than once, who had practically grown up believing she could be close to all her moms, no matter the differences. And now, she had crossed the line. Quietly, but with certainty. She wasn't just making a quick comment. She was drawing a long, thick line in the sand that said, "This chapter is closed. There's no handshake waiting at the end. No warm hug after a reunion meal. This isn't temporary frustration. It's deep, settled disappointment." Tony backed her firmly. That wasn't surprising. He's often braver with words, more outspoken. But even he delivered his part with a kind of uncomfortable clarity. He didn't hedge when he said what he felt, that Robyn has treated the family like a burden, like excess, like parasites, and he didn't flinch when the weight of the accusation landed. Parasites. The word sucked all the air out of the conversation. Not because it was cruel, because it felt unspoken until now. The way Robyn's actions seemed to treat the other wives and their children as problems, not people, as threats to her comfort, as obstacles to her peace. And when Tony said it, it felt like something only a son-in-law could think without fear of shattering years of personal loyalty. But the real moment wasn't in Tony's voice. It was in Mykelti's eyes. She didn't fight him on it, she didn't defend Robyn like she had in the past. She nodded, slowly, agreed, without aggression, without joy. It didn't feel like revenge, it felt like grief. Death of the version of family she used to believe could come back. And when she said that she, and by implication, many other siblings, wouldn't want Robyn present at future family reunions, it hit like thunder wrapped in a whisper. Because for so long, people had wondered how deep the fractures had really gone. This was the answer. They're not fractures anymore. Christine had already walked away physically. Janelle remained emotionally disconnected. Meri stepped out calmly, defeated but resolute. But Mykelti saying what she said, that confirmed this rift wasn't just between parents. The kids had inherited it now, and once the children stop reaching back, the story changes. The family doesn't knit together later. It reforms without the people who got left behind. For the audience, it was a surreal shift. Even those who defended Robyn, even those who wished for healing, could feel the finality of it all. There won't be a warm table years from now with everyone sharing stories. There won't be a multi-generational campfire with all the grandkids and all the moms laughing again. Robyn isn't sitting at that table, and she knows it. Because this wasn't an attack, it was an announcement. And once Mykelti said it, there truly was no going back. At first, people thought it might pass, that maybe the tension was part of a long fight that just needed time. Families fight. Families break apart, but sometimes they heal too. That's what people hoped. But now something different is happening. It's not just the wives who have grown distant. It's not just the older children who have stopped trying to call. It's the grandchildren who are growing up without ever really knowing the other side of their family. There's a stillness in that realization that hits unexpectedly hard. No holiday photos of all the cousins together. No shared laughter over grandma's kitchen table. No birthday parties packed with uncles and aunts. Kids screaming over cake, picture frames filled with matching sweaters and messy smiles. That's all gone now. Not with a bang, but with silence. Nobody says it directly, but the absence speaks for itself. Where's Robyn? Why isn't she in the background of family milestones? Why aren't the kids stepping over her feet during parties at Christine's house, or Janelle's grandkids spending time at a centralized home where the family once met as one? Because they don't, and they likely won't. There's a generation growing up now that knows of her, maybe, knows she married their grandfather, knows there was once some kind of unity, but what they're being raised with now is something else, something altered. A version of family that's built in separate lanes. Christine's grandkids are deeply connected. They visit, they bond. Janelle's children are doing their best to create what normal they can. And even Meri, detached, but gently hovering, is carving out small spaces of connection in her own quiet way. But Robyn's household, it feels closed off. A distant shadow. The door looks open but no one's walking through it. Viewers have started asking the hard questions. Why wouldn't Taylor and Solomon, two kids who were once surrounded by dozens of siblings and parents and grandparents, not see their nieces or nephews regularly? Why do we never hear stories of Savannah babysitting for Robyn's little ones, or Gwendolyn calling up Robyn for support? Because the separation isn't just emotional anymore. It's physical, lived, and permanent. And here's the part that stings the most. Robyn knows it. You can see it on her face in the rare moments she talks about the family without the usual emotional coding. There's a flicker of awareness, not guilt exactly, but something approaching quiet regret, because she isn't being squeezed out, she's been left behind. Robyn always wanted a big family. She said it over and over. She came from destruction, and she believed plural marriage would give her wholeness, that she would become part of something stronger than herself. But somewhere along the way, she stopped trying to belong to all of them. She belonged only to Kody, and that narrowed every door. Now, that decision sits at the center of an unspoken reality. The legacy is broken. There's no rebuilding when the kids grow up without shared memories, no reconnecting when adults stop feeling safe. What would it take now to bring everyone back into one room? What force would heal all those years of absence, abandonment, accusations, and emotional distance? No one's calling for unity anymore. They're just living lives apart. Not to spite anyone, but because the damage has made trust impossible. This isn't a cold season with a reunion coming at the end. It's a new chapter. And Robyn's name isn't written into most of the pages anymore. In the very beginning, back in those early episodes, there was laughter. The kind that fills a home with something you can't fake, warmth. Back then, they sat close together on the couch, shoulder to shoulder. The wives lifting each other up with talking points about unity, commitment, sisterhood. Kody sat in the middle, smiling like a man holding a secret too big to carry, but too proud to put down. There were kids everywhere, chaos in every corner, but it worked. At least it appeared to. There was a dream wrapped inside those moments, of togetherness, of redefining what family could look like. And if you rewatch that very first season now, it feels like someone else's life. A version of this family that got quietly buried while no one was looking. Today, there is no we. There is no shared household, no shared anything. The women, Meri, Janelle, Christine, have left in different ways, some louder than others, but all final. What was once a plural marriage is no longer a unit. It's one man in one house with one wife. And the rest. They've taken whatever pieces of dignity and hope were left and started rebuilding something of their own. Away from him, away from her. Kody doesn't speak like the leader of a family anymore. He speaks like a man defending decisions, clinging to a version of events only he seems to remember. His narrative has narrowed. His voice, it doesn't hold the weight it used to, because there's no one left to follow the script. And Robyn still sits beside him, in her quiet corner of the wreckage, saying words like faith and family, while her world shrinks down to the few who still look her way. She no longer speaks for a family, just for a house, a man. A belief that somehow this was never her fault, but even that belief is wearing thin, because the story isn't being told by producers anymore. It's being told by the kids, the ones who aren't showing up, the ones who have stopped calling, the ones who watched everything fall apart in slow motion. There won't be a reunion, not one that includes everyone, not one where people forget how many holidays were missed, How many moments went unanswered by silence? The calls that didn't come, the birthdays uncelebrated, the grandkids who never met each other. There is no easy path back, and maybe the hardest question isn't can it be fixed? Maybe it's this, was it ever real to begin with? Or did Robyn simply bring to the surface what had been growing for years? Resentment, favoritism, exhaustion, and the slow erosion of connection disguised as commitment. What do you think? Was Robyn the final wedge in a family always destined to fall apart? Or was she the consequence of a system that was already broken? Let me know in the comments, because after everything we've seen, maybe the real story was never about who stayed. Maybe it's about who stopped pretending.